Hello, I am Sinner, and today I'm going to talk about Book 10 of the Nicomachean Ethics, which is Pleasure and the Life of Happiness. And he talks about two things in this book, pleasure and happiness. The first part is sort of tailing off of what was talked about in the last part in some of the earlier chapters, where is pleasure good? That's the question that's being asked. And I think it's talked about earlier as well, but can't remember. Either way, pleasure is not in and of itself good or in and of itself bad. It's kind of relative to what the pleasure is in accordance with. And it sort of frames the second half, where his idea is basically pleasure is sort of the meeting point between correct faculty and correct circumstance, I guess. So, as an example, if you were to hear something pleasant, right, and like beautiful music, um, you would not only need beautiful, like really good ears to be able to hear the music as to its greatest pleasure, to your greatest pleasure, but you would also have to have good music to be playing. And this sort of thing applies not only like physically to your body, but also like mentally. So if someone is mentally corrupted or mentally of a poor moral state in terms of virtues, he will perceive things as pleasurable, even though they're not quote unquote like truly pleasurable. And the argument he gives is like that sick people, I don't know how this works, but according to sick people, things that are typically sweet taste bitter, right? And he says, like, well, this is clearly an example of like when you're in a lesser state, your ability to appreciate things changes, and therefore the pleasure according to it changes. So pleasure is like this perfect meeting point, and in a way, what you find pleasurable reflects you as much as it reflects what the thing that you're finding pleasurable is. Maybe even you more so. And I thought that was quite interesting. But it leads back into virtue because it means that in order to find the right things pleasurable, you have to be a morally virtuous man. So then he sort of concludes the book by talking about virtue again. And he talks about like the point of life again, which is happiness. And the argument is that happiness is what is, and this is like one of Aristotle's bits, is something that is self-serving, I guess you could say, exists for itself, or like an activity that is for itself is higher than an activity that serves a secondary purpose. So, as an example, he gives like virtues. So, if you're brave or courageous, what makes you brave is exercising bravery. But you can only exercise bravery in circumstances where you like where you need bravery, right? Like in day-to-day life, you don't really exercise bravery in banal and trivial things. Same thing with temperance or generosity or whatever it is. You only exercise it for another purpose, but with the contemplative mind and wisdom, you can contemplate without needing input, right? And that means that you can contemplate for contemplations like without needing anything else. So that makes it like higher than the other virtues. And according to him, the highest virtues. And he also makes this claim that basically by process of elimination, the gods must also partake in this. And it's actually the behavior of the gods. And he makes this claim that the contemplative part of the soul is the part of the soul that's divine, the part of humanity that's divine. Because, and he also says that it's the part that's missing in animals, the contemplative faculties and the ability to contemplate, and therefore happiness, which is the fulfillment of virtue, right? And contemplation is the fulfillment of virtue in a sense. Animals aren't capable of happiness in this sense. And by the way, I should mention this now. I don't know if I mentioned it already. I'm tired. Happiness doesn't mean like happiness the way we think of it. It means more like self-actualization. And he describes in the book happiness as being something quite distinct from pleasure and amusement. So keep that in mind. Like when you think of happy, you might think of a state of joy, being joyful. That is not what he means. He means more like self-actualized. That's what happy means. So animals can't really self-actualize in the way that humans can because they don't have contemplative activity, and therefore they can't tap into that there's no divine aspect of animals and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, overall it's very interesting. He spends like a page and a half complaining about sophists and about how they're stupid, and I didn't really see a reason for that. He just sort of goes off on them. But he's done that a few times in the book, so I'm not like in the Nicomachean Ethics, not this book. So I'm not, too surprised he did that. And yeah, it's intellectual activity that is the end goal. And then the thing is about that is the morals that have been talked about all throughout the book are sort of a secondary result of the happiness of the contemplative life, of the actualization of the highest virtue of wisdom. And I think that's actually quite a fair argument to make, because how could you ever possibly say that you're doing the right thing or that you're a good person when you don't know what is good or bad? If you're in a situation where you're brave, you do something brave. Let's say, for example, let's imagine you jump into shark-infested water to save someone who's drowning, and you pull them out, and only after you pull them out of the water with yourself, someone tells you, "Oh my gosh, you were so brave, you dived into the shark-infested water." Obviously, you're not being brave because you are only brave due to ignorance, right? And therefore it's not bravery. So I think in the case of all the virtues, what makes them not an accident but a deliberately good moral act is the knowledge of what is good and wrong, good or bad, right or wrong. And therefore, to argue that the primary virtue is wisdom or knowledge, or the disposition for the contemplative life, or happiness as an end, having happiness as an end, I think is actually kind of fair enough, because all the other ones require wisdom in order to actually be virtues. But that's all. Thank you for listening. I am Sinner, and I will see you in the next one.